Welcome everybody, and a very warm welcome, Antoine and Jeff, our guests today. We have a fantastic session today, both in terms of the subject as such. It's about AI, but not AI one, let's say one more view on AI, but actually what I love in the work you guys are doing is that you're seeing AI from a very different perspective, not just technically as a tool and so, but as you're calling as an ideology. So it's going to be a very exciting discussion. What I like specifically is how you see, I haven't seen this before actually, the possibilities that we have, as this is a major paradigm shift, right, for society, not only a technology, is the possibility that us as individuals in communities to have a say, right? So I think this is very much at the core of the discussions today. One wish I have is this is going to be very interactive. I hope you have seen the tool being able to interact with the questions, vote, and so on and so forth, even before. If you have not, they are in the chat, so you have the opportunity to continuously go in, vote, and put new questions. And of course, we can use the chat all the time, raise hands. And one wish I have, if we can, as much as possible, have the cameras on, because this, I think, will enhance a lot the discussions, as it's going to be so much interactive. And I know that you, Antoine and Jeff, are as excited as we are to learn from the questions and from the audience, right? So without further ado, I would like to leave the word to you, Antoine, and maybe you can present yourself, and Jeff also, and let's get started. But before that, our moderators then today, Kazi and Bjorn, will be helping with the questions in the chat. Did we forget anything?
Not for the moment. I will remind later on the rules when we start the discussion.
I know that Pascal cannot have the camera on because of his eating, perfectly fine, but otherwise, camera's on, guys. I know I'm a broken record. Antoine, please.
Thanks, Gerardo. Thanks, team, for inviting us. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Very excited. So, introduction-wise, I'm Antoine, French and Swiss, halfway between many things, building startups or thinking a lot about philosophy with Jeff. And so together we wrote that paper. We got very lucky to be published a bit late last year. And so looking forward to discuss and share with you what we've learned on that path. Jeff, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, so happy to meet all of you. Today, so I'm Jeff. In my regular life, I'm a business executive in the technology sector. Spent most of my career in the Far East, but I'm now sitting in Europe. And very early on, as we were in the final stages of the industrial era, I started to think also with others about, what should the new era look like? Because at that time I was very concerned, and I'm still quite concerned, that we would carry over legacy concepts and structures into a new paradigm, because we've done so in the past every time when we switch paradigms from the agricultural era into the industrial era. And it always caused a lot of human suffering and human pain. On the positive end, every paradigm shift does give us the space to have a relook at how we coexist and how we organize and how we communicate. I kind of, defined the start of the new era. I've always called it the information era, with the release of ChatGPT in 2022. It's a very artificial start. Of course, these things don't start a particular day. But AI, as we now have named it, does play a very important role. But it's very important, I think, when we go into the conversation today, that we don't think of AI as just another tool, another technology, that we take it a broader view, and that we will see the conversation that we have today as part of this extremely important discourse about what should our world look like as we move into this new paradigm. Because the responsibility for that is not with any particular person, it's with everyone, all 7 billion of us. And if we don't have that discourse, of course, not all 7 billion are able to participate, but if we don't have that discourse and we take ideas, structures, concepts, rules, unquestioned from the old era into the new, history tells us that it can be very painful. So that's a little bit of my background.
And thanks, Jeff. And I guess that's a great introduction for us, for me to just be a bit explicit about how we want to do that session. We want to eat our own dog food in some sense, and because of what Jeff has said, which is that we believe on the importance of civilian and discourse and the ability to debate, then it made no sense for us to try to just basically give you guys a lecture, right? Because that would be very much of a you consuming something that we say. It's not very interactive. It's not a discussion, and it is not necessarily the best way for all of us to walk away from here with thinking maybe a little differently, or even hopefully doing things a little bit differently in terms of discussing and assessing whether the world at large, or specifically AI connected topics, are aligned with your expectations or your values, right? So as such, we will not have slides and we will try not to speak for too long at a time. What we offer is, and what we want to do with you, is that we try to basically institute the first of such a civilian discussion about AI, right? And it should be animated by questions. As Bjorn said, there's a tool that we have set up in which any one of you can either ask questions or rank questions according to your preferences, what you're the most interested in. What we're going to do to get started is to answer with a short number, 4 or 5 questions that we thought were elementary, so that we create a bit of a common language and we enable everyone to just access the discussion in most meaningful terms. We're going to try to make this as fast as possible, and once this is done, our dearest wish is to engage in a conversation with you and to debate, right? To be a bit adversarial and dialectic, so that we learn out of this interaction with you, and everyone basically learn, and we make progress together over assessing and judging whether what's going on is up to our values and wishes, or if we actually are not aligned with what's going on. That's the declaration of intent.
Declaration of intent that we take. So let's get started. And just a reminder for everyone in the session. So Bjorn and I will be checking the questions in the polls and also in the chat. So in the chat, you can include follow-up questions on the ones that we are right now. Yep. If not, what we will do is follow these first introductory questions, and then we will use the ones in the poll in the order that they are ranked. So that's how we will continue the conversation. But let's get things started. By the way, the questions will be timed. So I will remind if we are already over 5 minutes, in case Antoine or Jeff want a couple of extra minutes to finalize some ideas, but if not, we move to the next question. That way we try to have as many questions as possible. So let's get started with the basic one, and the title was AI as an ideology. So why don't we start from that point? What do you mean when you call AI an ideology?
Jeff, do you want to get started?
Yeah, okay, I'll take it. Like I said in the brief introduction, in the conversation we have today, we shouldn't be considering AI as a confined technology. What we need to look at is the discourse that in which this whole idea of AI is embedded, right? The assumptions that guide its development, The future it proposes to us, and the way it shapes our perception of things, right? And this is exactly what ideology does. So ideology can be defined as a doctrine. That's not the definition we take here. We take ideology as something that shapes your perception, that proposes a certain future, and that imposes, if you wish, certain assumptions. That's why we have placed this AI as an ideology.
And to add on to this thing for everyone, it's we didn't start the conversation with ideology in mind. It emerged a little bit out of recognizing that AI simply doesn't fit the bill of a tool or like a technical thing. It's just way too big in its influence, as an object in our daily life, right? As such, it's a bit everywhere. It touches everywhere. It's very hard to define. But what we realized was, if we got back to the definition of a political ideology, is that AI does help to look at the present. It does help to look at certain futures, and it does kind of propose a way to get from the present to the future. And that is, in certain cycle, the definition of a political ideology. And so as such, it inspired us to say, well, maybe ideology is an interesting metaphor in comparison for AI to reflect how important and ever pervasive it is in our daily life, right? And not get confined into just technology. I think the other thing we can add onto this is how ideologically rich the AI project is and the AI objects are, right? And how influenced by other ideologies, and how a lot of subcurrent were actually there. And it sort of got us a sense of, what feels important with AI here is that it's way too big. It cannot be reduced. Actually, it's an interesting metaphor. And it helps us to realize that we have many different dimensions and many different ways we can consider it. Like the technical part is one, but the social part of it is also one. The philosophical part of it, the future definition of it is also all valid. And the likely conclusion is that if we want to assess the impact of this on our daily lives as citizens, we have to take all the dimensions in consideration, not just a technical side or even just a subset of that.
So you're talking about this present, future, these assumptions, and that could be that perhaps every use of AI is an ideology, but you have specifically talked about three ideologies hidden inside of AI. So which are these three, or why do you move towards three?
Yeah, so basically we looked at three areas of ideology in relation to AI. Yeah, one is inevitability, right? So here AI is framed as something that's autonomous, it's unstoppable, which has a consequence that it kind of depoliticizes scrutiny, because we have to move, we have to be fast, etc., etc. The second one is ideology of scale, which assumes that a concentration of compute data and capital is required, and that monopolistic control is prioritized over more narrow plural development. So that's the scale, right? Then the third one, the coherence, is much more about meaning. It's about coherence versus intelligibility. Right? So it's about fluency optimization, which is then prioritized or privileged over interpretation, ambiguity, and moral reasoning. So these are the three areas of ideology that we discussed in the paper.
Yeah, and maybe as a pragmatic example, I remember that with Jeff, we spent a lot of time, and he triggered a little bit of project reading a paper that the CEO of Anthropic wrote over a year ago, and which is a bit of a declaration of love for AI and AI project. And that's the first artifact that felt quite ideological in nature to us, because it was very much a declaration of love to a certain future. And to be very precise, one thing which was interesting was about the claim that AI would soon be able to cure all illnesses. Right? So there's like a super AI. I don't remember the preferred moniker for like this super thing that this person specifically uses, But basically, his claim was like, at some point, super AI would be able to cure all illnesses. But what struck us is that by saying this, and in the rest of the text, he basically said that you could find a universal cure worldwide for any illness. And that's a choice, because there's nothing you could potentially do, which is to try to find local cure for a restricted set of illness, right? So you have less illnesses overall, but more variants of variations, I would say, of the cures, right? But yet, like, clearly his mindset was towards, no, like, it makes sense and it's suitable to have a worldwide cure for any illness that appears. And we found that that was quite ideological to an extent, or at least it was a very strong point of view, right? Because it's considered as understood and not debatable that the best things are global and worldwide, right? And like local variations are maybe not desirable. And that got us to discuss about analogy of scale, because it essentially reminded us intellectual and mental models about essentially the idea of you always will win if you do things at scale. Make sense, Kazi? That's as a practical example, right, of how things can get a bit illogical. Jeff, do you want to add on to this?
No, I think it's quite comprehensive.
And we can explore later on these three ideologies.
Yeah.
Where do they take us, and how can we combine or not them? So let's continue with this first set of questions to set the ground. We will come back to the poll questions later on, and I see some of the questions in the chat now very related to those. So we'll come back to those. But you're talking about AI as ideology, the three ideologies hidden, but someone is selling AI just as a tool. So why isn't just a tool?
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the vital risks, I guess, that we are highlighting. I mean, both Antoine and myself come out of a technology product background, right? So we know how technology is marketed, and that makes us a little bit apprehensive of, big kind of bucket terminology like AI, or in the recent past, cloud, right? And I think what we need to realize is that AI is not a single discrete tool. It's a whole constellation of systems and institutional logics. And AI is very much embedded, or will be embedded, in our structures of power and meaning, right? So, and it tends to amplify the logic of its deployment in those structures of power and meaning. So if we just take AI as a tool, as, I don't know, Microsoft Word or whatever, or Microsoft Teams, which what we're now talking to, we get confused, and we get guided we assume that what we're dealing with is neutral and is just there to help us to do something. But we're talking about language here. These are large language models. We're talking about computing progressing that has a direct impact on meaning making. So if we are blind to that, we get guided by the deployment logic of AI, which, as I said, is not a single tool, but a whole constellation of logics and systems. So this is it's very, I think, if anybody would take away one thing from this conversation here today, I hope it would be that don't take AI as a single discrete tool the way it is marketed. It's definitely not. So, yeah. Antoine?
Yeah, I guess two things I can add, which might be a little bit more philosophical, but nonetheless could be interesting, right? So Yuval Harari, that some of you probably know out of Homo Deus and etc., was in Davos last week, and he made a pretty interesting argument about this, saying, look, the thing is that when we made a knife, the knife had no agency about what to do with itself, including producing other knives, or deciding wood to murder, or whether to actually just chop carrots, right? The agentic AI typically actually is a knife that can decide all of those things pretty much on its own. It has a form of agency, which already means maybe the problem is the tool thing is to say it's a different type of tool, but I think it's a pretty graphic example of saying like it's much more than what we commonly refer to as a tool. The next thing we can say, which is a bit more maybe abstract, because Jeff and I spent a lot of time in Asia, we're a bit influenced by this, and we recognize also that in the West, we tend to have a very strict separation between the subject and the object, and in this case, like the human and the tool. And we tend to fall into consideration that we influence the tool, but the tool doesn't influence us, right? This has actually been long disproven, and if you go to the other side of the Asian continent, it makes zero sense because, in other conception of the word, like everything is circular and connected, and it goes both ways. And so the idea here is to say, why is AI not a tool also is that even in the Western side, where we sort of wanted to believe that the tool was never influencing us, now we can't but accept that the tool is having a very disproportionate influence into how we behave, right? And this is actually nothing new. Like, this whole social media topic has probably already been made that thing very clear. But another way to just look at why is AI not just a tool is that the tool as understood within a Western context of something inert that has zero power on you and on your behavior is completely past, right? We are being shaped. We shape the tools as much as they shape us. And as Jeff said, when it comes to AI, it doesn't shape what we do or how we live. It shapes how we talk and how we think, right? Which is the sort of the most intrusive, I would say, and powerful dimension of what makes us human and what makes us citizens, etc. So as such, the tooling thing is, yeah, like the tip of the iceberg, innocent or not.
So it's in a
Interesting
way
response.
it's symbiotic. So, and I think when we go further down into the conversation today, I think that's another topic to think about. I mean, we going into another thing that is really different in this era of information era, this AI era, is that now the tool between quotes. Is no longer just a dumb tool that we use to do something. It actually is a partner. And it's a partner that evolves, that gets better and better at what it does. Which means that if you're in any partnership that you can imagine, human to human, in this case, human machine, both parties need to consider, what is my stake in this partnership? What is my agency in this partnership? And what is the value that I bring into this partnership? So in that sense, also AI is not just a simple tool, it's an evolving, capable system that is very good, in certain things, bringing cohesion, in precision, in speed. We as a human are very good at certain other things, right? And I think we will talk about this later, meaning making, ambiguity, etc., etc. But in any partnership, if your partner is developing, you want to make sure that you're also developing, so the partnership remains in balance. And in our case, we want to make sure that as a human in this AI environment, again, we need to drop the word tool, in this information environment, that we are able to not only to exist and survive, but in fact to flourish. And that requires some rethinking, because in the past we've been very much conditioned in the industrial era, where it was mass production, mass consumption. That was basically our world. Humanity has become relatively passive user of tools. And now this tool requires us to be an active participant. So I also would like to turn the tables a little bit back to us as humans. What do we? I don't have the answer, but how can we step up to the plate in order to thrive in this new paradigm?
Correct. And to tap onto this, right? So a few things, right? So it doesn't mean that we want to anthropomorphize or at will AI, right? Actually, rather not, right? So it doesn't matter if the partnership is the right vocabulary, right? I guess the perspective here is that it is not a tool as we know them, right? And we enter a structural coupling, if we want to be very technical, but like we enter a form of dependency and relationship with something, right? And we always have done this with everything around us, human, animal, nature, or whatnot. It is important for us to develop our ideas and our perspective to assess whether we feel that relationship is balanced and satisfactory in terms of what we want as humans, individually and as a group, right? That's what really matters. And to look back, Kasi, to like the question about ideology, right? What's also here, how we feel it's a bit sensitive, although it's not specific to AI. It's like my hammer doesn't have much of an ideology, even if by taking the handle, I do access memory of all of the humans behind who have used, different type of tools to try to just like hammer shit and do whatever, right? But it's getting more and more obvious how the AI tools that we use are so influenced by those that make them, right? Maybe we're going to get a little bit polemical here, right? But like the example of Grok and his very infamous lead is quite a case in point, right? Over like, it is very obvious and transparent that there is an ideology and a very certain point of view, which is baked in the tool, right? And so the relationship that anyone has with the tool working on whatever is absolutely influenced by a very specific point of view that you might agree with and not agree with, that you might be able to balance out in your relationship with this. Nonetheless, this is not a neutral thing. You're not using a hammer any way you want. You're using a certain type of hammer within a certain context that wants to do it basically like hammer certain nails and not others, right? So as such, the question about the tool reveals to us a little bit how ideological and different level AI we think can be.
Just for as we promised to have 5 minutes top time, I will raise my hand when the 5 minutes are okay. I'm not going to interrupt you. No, it's just for you to know that we are already over the time.
There are a few comments would bring up, I think, relating to this. Or
yes,
Let's
go for the comments.
Oh, so first of all, you mentioned Dario, and he has apparently just published an essay with the opposite view. So he's already changed his mind. So
yeah, only the fools don't change their mind, right?
Exactly. No, I think it's a good thing that you change your mind. It's only in politics where you're not allowed to change your mind. Let me see, what was it when it comes to, let me see. So one thing was more relating to but maybe it ties back to a question on the history and how the impact is of this tool versus other breakthrough tools that happen in human history. Maybe
we'll have that as a question later on. So let's leave that one. So let's just try to close this first part with very simple questions to set the ground. We'll go back to that question, Björn, and then we can come back as well to Alon's comment on ideology.
Yeah.
We have two very simple questions now to close this first part of setting the ground. You have talked a lot about the importance of partner or not partner, about the tools or not tools, and why AI is not just a tool and that has agency, in which we have to do something about it. We have to make decisions on how we're going to use it and how. But we still have the use of all the technology that we've had before to replace and extend our capabilities of humans. So what, from an AI and ideology perspective, what's the difference between replacing and extended humans? Is it positive or not so much?
Well, for me, the way I look at this discussion on replacing or extending, it's very much, I mean, if you look at replacement, it's really about role inversion, right? Where the human moves from judgment to supervision and to prompt work, right? And the system's kind of optimization logic then governs kind of the outcomes. That would, for me, would kind of be the replacement scenario. But if you look at an extension, and we use a case example in the paper from, I think, Estonia, there you see that it's much more structural coupling than human. Then basically it becomes human judgment coupled with the precision and the speed of the machine. And in my mind, and maybe that's a really bad kind of metaphor, but that's the picture that has formed in my mind. It becomes kind of a mental exoskeleton, right? So I mean, when you put them, right? So it's you who decide to run. It's you who decide where to run or where to jump. But you can now run and jump a lot faster and a lot more precise without falling over. But it's not the machine that does the judgment. It's you that does the judging. It's the machine that brings in the precision and the speed. While in a replacement scenario, it's you who just query it, and the machine, you let the machine make the judgment. And that's, as we, know all the way back from the Socratic conversations, it requires us to actually be quite knowledgeable, and not just let ourselves be able to challenge the machine, to be able so that the machine helps us think better rather than that we just prompt the machine to let it think. Right. So that's the way I kind of look at it.
And to offer, like, there is a maybe funny metaphor that was gifted to me a couple of years ago that explicit this, is to say, there's a choice between Iron Man and Terminator, essentially, right? Iron Man is exactly augmentation cobotics extension, right? So it makes a human, and even a human who's physically impaired, right, actually like a lot more powerful on so many levels. Well, Terminator basically replaces, right? And the question I would want here is to say, like, is it, what's different? Is it good or bad? I think what animates us a lot is like, what for? What for do we want to replace, or do we want to augment, right? And it's a really, really important question, because, in terms of practical application of AI technologies within the workplace, we hear about this all the time, about like, job replacement and productivity. And the question is like, what for, right? Are we trying to do things better, or are we trying to do a 80%, 80-20 version of what we do, just fully automated because we think it's going to be cheaper, right? And this is where there is like a real question about like, what is the project? And we believe there is a choice here, right? It's a choice to direct those innovations and direct those technologies towards augmenting people and then getting them to save time to do something else, right? Versus getting the company to save time overall to fire some, right? And so it's impossible almost to answer the question about like, whether it's good or not. What's important is what is our opinion about the workplace or society as a whole in the future? Like, what is it that we want to do? Do we want to regress towards essentially only having access to what is automatable because it's supposed to be cheap, because it's supposed to be robots? Or do we want to keep on having access to uniquely complex, ambiguous, qualitative type of task, which are then made available because the brunt of the repeatable work is done by machine? In both cases, you have augmentation and replacement, but they're roadmapped, if we want, in very different terms, because they have different final objectives.
It seems that the majority of the market dynamics bring us to a lot of replacement, it seems, today. So last question of this block. Do you have proof if anyone is doing AI differently?
So, well, but we've put a few cases in the paper. I think in Taiwan, I think there was one in Barcelona. I mentioned the one in Estonia. So that's more on an institutional level. There's quite there's some data coming out about how AI or Gen AI or LLMs are actually being used. And you can see on the kind of typical distribution, let's say on the far end of the typical distribution, you see this already. And I think a lot more people would be capable of using it in this way already once they've been made aware of it. I think many people who are well informed and are able to operate in the way that we describe are still carrying forward some of the logics of the old era. I mean, I know that a lot of people are using somebody. I think I don't know who it was. Maybe one of the people here named Gen AI as Google on steroids. Well, it's not, right? It's not a search engine on steroids, but many people are using it that way, right? And then you get into this kind of almost into this virtual possible replacement scenario where you are basically just doing the prompts and let the machine do the judgments. So the technology, if you wish, is already to a degree capable. It's just us who need to start redefining our role into this and disconnect ourselves a little bit from where we were, which is extremely difficult because we are, animals of habit. We are, all of us, and we are conditioned by the previous environment. We adapt to environment. We don't adapt very fast. I mean, that's a big thing as well. I mean, the technology and capital moves fast, but humans need time to adapt. Human institutions need time to adapt. And the first big step of adaptation is always, and has always been, and will always be, awareness, and in this case, awareness, I think, of our own capabilities. I've got one thing that may be a little bit controversial, and I was trying to look up some data, but I can't reach it that fast enough. I mean, for instance, one thing that is also, in my view, a outdated structure, an outdated idea that we're bringing forward is the idea of what is human intelligence. We've defined human intelligence I think in the early 20th century with the idea of IQ. IQ is not a lot more than who is qualified to become an engineer, right? So because these are all the skills that you need to be an engineer. So if you have high IQ, you have the basic capabilities to be an excellent engineer, right? But human intelligence is a lot more because not everybody is an engineer. So I'm take this as an example. If we take a very narrow view of IQ equals human intelligence, and then we see a machine that can count a lot faster and do a lot of these kind of tasks a lot faster than a human being, we start becoming anxious because the machine might be smarter than I am. The machine will never be smarter than you are because the human beings have, and I have a graph on that somewhere, have many different types of intelligences. And many of these intelligences actually express themselves in the physical world, right? So, which a computer can, of course, never do. And I think in that sense, we might not have used, we never in any period of time have used our full potential because humans always use the capabilities they possess in a certain environment in order to survive and to thrive. If the environment shifts, we need different skill sets. This is, I mean, I'm going to take this example anyway. I might go over the 5 minutes. There's this, I think it's in one of Graeber's books, or maybe Jared's book, Jared Diamond's book, I forgot. He talks about native people in Papua New Guinea. You drop us, all of us, I think, here, in the middle of a forest in Papua New Guinea, we probably survive a week, right? That's it. You drop them in a forest, in an unknown forest where they've never been, and they will survive because they have developed the capabilities, the cognitive capabilities, to identify which plants are edible and how to survive. And that's an intelligence that we haven't developed because we are urbanites and their intelligence probably doesn't function in our environment. So as the environment shifts, we need to leverage more of our capabilities. And again, that's already in our software, it's already in our brain. It requires awareness in order to do. And these are intelligences that the machine doesn't necessarily doesn't possess.
Right. So I think we diverged a little bit over consciousness and what makes it different from machines, and this is great. I just want to get to come back to your question, and we'll extend for a few minutes about who's doing things differently, right? I think, there's a lot of different examples that are worthwhile quoting, on different levels, right? So one example that I like quoting, because in the West it's a bit less known, is about, very stupidly, maybe what is the necessary condition for a generative AI system to be commercialized in China. There's a difference versus European standard, which is that you have to declare your training data. And I know it sounds maybe a bit tedious, but it's a massive difference, right? Because it means you cannot actually push something without declaring what it's been trained on. And it basically obliges you also to basically declare how it's been trained, right? And this already is a huge, it's a very big variance in the ideological and the transparency of the tool, right? Versus even an European thing where you have to declare certain things, but not, and not to talk to certain American models where it's a complete black box, right? And it exists. You have in Switzerland, you have a not really state-sponsored, but university-based LLM has been built on local languages. Now, the question is, people are critical of this, saying like, oh yeah, but it's not as great. Which is just another question about like who's doing differently AI, which is what is good enough, right? There's, I think, something that it's important for us to bring about, which is, I think, we think is a bit ideological also, is everyone gets a little bit taken into that race where everyone is supposed to have to be very enthusiastic about the latest models, right? And, you know, it sounds to me and it sounds to us exactly like this marketing pressure that Apple is so good at doing about everyone having to buy the next iPhone, right? Although technically, it's less and less clear how iPhone, I don't know, 17 now probably is different from iPhone 16, right? It's less and less the case. And in AI, it's less and less the case as well. Yet, the discourse around it is that you have to be like, you know, at the top end, right? The most at the boundaries. The reason I'm saying this is part of the reason we tend to put less attention on alternatives is that they also look technically maybe or on the top benchmark less productive or less, let's say, good than the latest models from, I don't know, like OpenAI also. But if we look at them from a pure productive matter, saying like, well, like if they're better than the ChatGPT of last year, that's probably still vastly enough for 90% of the population to do incredible things, right? And this is in this case would be a Swiss hosted with, you know, the 4 national Swiss languages model, and that actually gets you to be sovereign to a large extent, right? And at least if you're under the bias of someone, you're under the bias of the university professor next door, not someone on the other side of the pond, if you're European, right? That is already different, right? And we're not even talking about applications yet. Kazi, I'm going to stop here.
I just want to put
I just want to
put one extra because I think it's very important, and I think we mentioned it somewhere. I mean, because Antoine was just talking about, you know, the different geographies, and we've got these 3 big AI wages, right? We've got China, we've got the US, and we've got Europe. Right? I don't want to go through that all 3 now, but I just want to talk a little bit about China, just answering to talking towards your question, how people are doing it different. This is not in the context of who does things better, it's just different, and I want to make sure that's clear. If I look at the AI application in China, implementation in China, first, they are by and large open source, which is very different from the Americans and what we are using here. But second, AI in China is very much embedded into the infrastructure, right? Smart cities, smart everything. So it's embedded. It's not so much the adoption by consumers, by individuals, is much lower than it is elsewhere in the world, because people still get their information essentially from online forums. They stick to that. So they have all these all the tools available there as well. They can ask all the questions to the Gen AI, but the Chinese consumer is much less willing to do that. Well, it's much more embedded into the infrastructure. So you can already see a different way of dealing it within a different cultural setting. And if we later on we might go into the geographical differences. I find it very interesting because I think if you look at the 3 big blocks, you know, they all have their dark side and their light side. And as always in humanity, if you combine the light sides together, you get a pretty complete model. But you know, if we don't, we get pulled away by the darker sides of the models in place. So yeah. So also, like I said as well, if we take end of 2022 as the official starting point of the information era, we're only in 2026. So really first innings. So it's hard to say, look back at what people are already doing. We need to design this as we go. The only real historical reference that we have is in the previous paradigm shift, when every time we ended up in a bloody mess, right? So I hope we would like to work on not going there this time.
Great.
Very interesting, and a lot of discussions also with when it comes about ideologies, places, and models. There was a very interesting discussion in the chat about your Iron Man versus Terminator type of model, connected with driven by individuals, money, and companies. There was another one related as well with countries. So there's a lot of very interesting side discussions in the chat, but we have prepared some questions in the tool. Are you okay? We start with those, and we try to see which ones we have in the chat.
Yes, and thanks everybody for being very active. That was fantastic.
Some of the order has changed in the
it's changed all the time.
Exactly.
Oh, it's dynamic. I didn't realize that.
Exactly.
No, it's live, so we can be taken down.
You can continue to lobby and vote on your favorite ones.
And some of these questions have already been part of the discussion in the chat. Yeah. So it's
So let's start with the first one. Are you okay with that?
Sure.
I think that it was Adriano who posted this one online. Adriano,
you got the first one. The top one.
That was me. But go for it.
Yeah, but you might want to add something on it.
I think just ask. I think the question is quite straightforward. I think ask it, and if there is a need to complement, I will do it.
Let's go for number one then.
Seems to be the winner. So I'll pick it up first, perhaps. So
yeah,
I mean, there's definitely some similarities there between the examples mentioned here. I mean, writing and printing, internet, they all had, they were all mediums or media that were embedded in how we create and communicate meaning. So there's there's definitely some similarity there. One thing that I mentioned earlier on is that AI is a bit of a misnomer. I think we should really look at a paradigm shift like the shift we had from being hunters gatherers into agriculture, from agriculture into industrial, from industrial into post-industrial information era. So we need to look at AI is kind of a symptom of that or an expression of that, but it's not the only expression. I mean, the fact that hyperconnectivity, for instance, is also an expression of that, right? So the fact that we are all very connected, constantly connected with everyone. I mean, I'm also old enough to, when I was a kid, that picking up, the phone hanging on the wall and dial a number and get somebody on the other side of the world to pick up was like, calling an alien, right? That's unimaginable now, right? So this hyperconnectivity element is also important. Fundamentally different for me. What is very important is that acceleration, speed. That's why I made a point of that earlier on. This will accelerate a lot of speed in our communication, in our meaning making. And if you have a faster car or you need different infrastructure, different types of roads in order to make driving safe, in our case, it means also different kinds of governance, because the governance for a slower age will not be the governance for a faster age. It probably will mean something, and I don't know what. I don't have the answers, but it will for individuals as well. If you are in an age, if all of a sudden your speed accelerates by such an extent, like this exoskeleton example that I gave, you probably also need to start some way structuring or governing or ritualizing your life a little bit more as well. Otherwise, Otherwise, you just, you become like fireworks. You just burn up like that, right? So I think there are a lot of repercussions from the incredible speed acceleration that we are going through, moving into this computerized information era.
And to illustrate this, maybe because I just find it a useful metaphor, so maybe it might be useful to some of you, right? In terms that we're talking about like how complexity is basically directly a function of like interconnectivity and speed, right? But to materialize this, some people have said like the difference between COVID and the Spanish flu is that it took a year and a half for the Spanish flu to go from Spain to South America. It took 3 months for COVID to go from Wuhan to the entirety of the globe, right? Was the consequences that we all know. And so I think one of the things we say is like, regardless of what we think about what AI is inside, its effect on the world is that it's just making things much faster, right? Which then let us conjuncture that potentially the next whatever event comparable to like the Spanish flu or COVID will not take 3 months to go global. It will take 3 weeks. And maybe the next time it's going to take 3 days, right? And it doesn't matter what we think about what the tool is or whether it's good or not. What matters is that it is very unlikely, probabilistic speaking, that it's going to disappear or it's going to actually reduce interconnections or speed or complexity. In all probability, it's just going to keep on increasing. Maybe a little less, maybe a little more, I don't know. But it's definitely going to go faster than in 2021. And in that sense, like, this is why that's how we wanted to introduce this. I hope we made it well. Is like, we don't pretend academically that this is a paradigm shift, right? I mean, I don't even know what a paradigm shift is because, you could all disagree with Thomas Kuhn or not know who he is. And, we will be there for 4 hours, right? What we're saying is that it's a useful metaphor to think of this as a revolution, a paradigm shift, or a strong rupture. Because if you think probabilistic of the word and the trajectories, like, it definitely is making things go faster, and it's very unlikely that things are going to slow down, right? The other thing that we can add on to like what makes it a little bit different probably is language, right? I mean, we're social beings, right? And communication and language is a very, very fundamental tool, resource, whatever process that we have to do everything about our life. This is how we trust people. This is how we learn, right? And this is typically how we learn useful stuff, right? And now there's an order of magnitude into like generative AI since like 3 years into its common of language and how truth seeming can be or trust inducing can be versus anything else that we had before. Right, and this is so important to us, right? Because it means that through those tools we could trust the wrong thing, right? But it sounds true, and as such, that's another reason why, again, it feeds into saying like, well, it's probably useful to see it as very, very, very different. And yeah, I don't like. I see like messages popping. So Kasi, Bjorn, let us know. Like maybe we cut here and we.
No, we can cut here because you were jumping into the next question.
Okay.
But at the same time, there's a very interesting comment from Alan talking about the way that AI is trying to be to reduce through technology the complexity of human and our inherent complexity, which brings us to number 2 pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
In which ways it's gonna substitute real human things like language. You talked about language. You talked about this. We have talked about this complexity. In which ways AI can take the place of human-to-human interaction.
Could I add to that, because I did the question and I tried to add an edit as well. There is many of us listened to Nate Hagen, and I was quite influenced by one quite recently, and there was a comment there that, and a parallel to social media, which, I mean, we know already has caught our attention. We spend more and more time on social media instead of the danger with AI is that it might capture our affection as well. And if you combine affection and attention, that means that you actually prefer chatting with your AI to have a human interaction. And this is already happening, as a matter of Right. So I as a little bit risk aware, maybe I would say that if we have our best friend is our AI chatbot, haven't we gotten a little bit too far on what should we do about it?
Yeah, very sycophantic. No, I think the risk is very shared. I tend to refer to this, and we tend to like so declaring we would probably tend to be quite on the left of some things for some of you, right? And Jeff mentioned David Graeber, which is hardly the most right-leaning person that ever walked this planet. But so beyond what you've talked, like reminded me of like what the Marxists call alienation, right? And
yes.
What's interesting is that so there's a thinker in France called Bernard Stiegler that was talking about alienation. He also had the technical term which is absolutely impossible to pronounce. I'm not going to try. But what he was saying is that the industrial era basically alienated workers by sort of taking the know-how from them, right? And the move on to this is to say what's interesting with what Jeff and I call the supermarket culture is that it took our know how to live from us through mass consumption and standardized products, right? And if you take a Marxist lens for what it's worth, metaphorically, those are two alienation, like those two things lead to a form of alienation, right? On two different things, what you do and how you live. And so another reason for me to be very worried, and that goes into what you're saying, Bjorn, is if you think about it, then AI is taking away how you think, right? So it's another vector of alienation on how you think, right? And how you feel is behind, in my view, how you do, how you live, and how you think, right? That actually crosses over. And so, of course, if you're being sort of alienated, again, quote, through the three variables of know-how, no live, and no think, it's almost inevitable that you're going to be very easily alienable from an emotional perspective, right? And so it's a bit grim as a comment, right? Because it probably makes your perspective even worse rather than better.
No, it was exactly what I thought. So
no, 100%. The anarchist joke is typically this: is to say, you can see where things are going wrong, where people in the same building, they will stop going to the door of the neighbor who's a bit noisy with a party, and will start to call the cops.
Yeah.
Right. And what it is exactly this: you sever human relationship in favor of a mediation. Right. That's an outsourcing process, right? So you outsource something that is a friction, sort of, something ambiguous, something basically packageable towards this, like an anxiety. And the thing is that it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? This is old news, right?
I think I need to add a little bit to that, though, Antoine, because I think when you talk about this kind of human interaction, I think it's risky to look at that in isolation of, let's say, a technical environment, whether it's social media or now AI. The technology itself can magnify certain problems that are already occurring in society. So when we look at social media, because that's kind of the prelude to this, first it was an extension of the mass production, mass consumption. It was basically just another sales channel in a way, right? At the same time, during the 20th century, most of our social structures had kind of broken down, and this was not just because of economics, but many reasons, secularization, and many reasons why our social structures. So these are mutual enhancing forces that then get people to look for, let's say, joy and happiness in a different way, and for community in a different way. And then this kind of social media comes up, and then they look for it there. Yes, so AI carries that risk as well, probably even to a bigger extent, because while in social media, what you see is manipulated by algorithms, what you see typically is still either created or shared by another human being, albeit not a human being that you know, and of course a lot of fake stuff as well. Well, if with a broken down social structure, if people who also, because there's no social structure, have very limited self-awareness, they basically do not know who they are as an individual because they don't have a social environment that tells them who they are as an individual, then very easily they can get even further confused by a computer. And that computer, like we said before, that computer is driven by cohesion, by uniformity in a way, by trends analysis, so not so much about individuality so much. So so rather than fully separating the two, I do think we need to look at if we look at this, we need to look at a broader context. I make this point because not only in this kind of, let's say, call it social interaction between quotes, also in the broader utilization of our interaction with machine agents, it's very important that we start educating ourselves in a different way, and broaden certain areas of creativity, broaden certain areas of self-awareness. Because if you don't know who you are, you get lost on social media because you believe what you think you see in the mirror, but you might even get more lost when computers become agents. So yeah, that risk is there, but it's actually again an expression of what we are trying to highlight in this paper, that what could be really bad could also be extremely good. Because the vision, at least that I have, and I think it's somewhere further down the line, I'm probably jumping too fast, is that if we have a healthy civic discourse on meaning creation, on how to use this tool, about values that need to be in there, you will end up not with a humanity that looks like a green field of grass, very uniform, which social media to a certain extent also does, but you end up with a field with multicolored flowers. And AI is also capable of doing that, but it really depends on how the human interacts with it.
Correct. If for those who are familiar with this, with Audrey Tang and her crew, right? And it's a pre-generative, I mean, it's a pre-ChatGPT instance, even if I'm not mistaken, or like very, very early. They had put together.
You have to explain who Audrey Tang is, because maybe not everybody's
Okay,
aware.
so for those who've never met, Audrey Tang is the special digital ambassador of the Republic of Taiwan, and who has also been the digital minister for almost 10 years, between 2014 and 2023, I think. She's a very interesting persona to pursue for a lot of things, right? And one of the things that's interesting is that she put in place a lot of really software products in society in Taiwan on behalf of the government, and she can boast truthfully to have reduced polarization within that society. So one thing that she's done, which is a case in point, is it was really important to have civilian chambers of discussion for big social problems. The example she takes usually is when Uber came in Taiwan, and society was divided over what to do with it: ban it, license it, let it go, whatever, right? And one thing they did, which is a case of what Jeff has said, right, is they created like this massive Zoom call with like hundreds of people, and they divided into basically sub rooms, and it was mediated by an AI. And it was incredibly productive because the mediation was very purposefully engineered towards making sure that the big talker like me don't take too much space, making sure that the people that are maybe a bit more either shy or either would be a bit more reflexive and need a good solid 5 seconds of before the next actually are given that space, right? And there's a completely AI, and so if you want machine mediated deliberation process, and there is very happy to share, like there's like papers showing how successful that has been, and that is like a true political social example of this, of AI being, you can regress and fall into talking to AI because it's less friction, it's more coherent, it's more sycophantic, right? It tells you what you want to hear. But it can also be engineered to essentially make difficult conversation amongst humans, which is the most beautiful thing, even more beautiful in a sense, not less difficult, but actually go further, right? And not stop as early, for instance. So hope this helps as like a pragmatic, practical example of things.
Geraldo, I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yes, I have. We have a lot of questions, but I saw a very good comment from you, Toby, that I think it would be good to bring up to give another perspective. Sorry for the cold call, Toby.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, good. So the point about education, I think here, so it really stems from the earlier comment I made about adaptation. So I get a little triggered when people talk about how that there's some sort of rule that says that we tend to adapt more slowly than our technology. I mean, I think you have to unpack that a little bit. It's the technology never evolves faster than the human because it's still made by them. What can happen though is that if the technology is made by really, really brilliant people, there's going to be a lot of people a little further down the line, and that's where the problem starts. Not that the technology has its, but I don't want to end up sounding like some silly tech bro. The important thing is that we want to try and adapt. I mean, that has to be a precondition for avoiding the fail state, our own adaptation. And I know that what I use these tools to do is to have it explain things to me. That's really so there's a risk, obviously, that it explains hallucinatory content, but the true advantage of it is that you can get it to go off and check things for you as well and prove through its checks that what it's saying is veridical and truthful. Now, those two things in combination, that it can take over this task of, carrying out the checks and the checks and adding the tallies to work out what's most likely to be true and what's most likely to be false. The fact that it can do it so efficiently and just with you and it in a conversation, this is the thing that will rescue us and that will ensure that we can keep up with the technology. But I mean, that's really, I'm just throwing that idea in there. I have no idea how this audience will react to that point, but that is for me the only thing it's good for. I mean, explaining and having us adapt faster.
Yeah, I agree, by the way, on your point that technology, of course, emerge. I mean, there's no such thing as the human and technology. These are not separated. Technology comes from us. And but in a way, we also come from technology because technology emerges from our humanity. But then again, it alters our environment, and that requires us to alter again. And so it's kind of back and forth. But there is a bit of a latency there, right? So because from the typical technology adoption curve that we all know, we know that when something comes out, not the whole humanity kind of goes and adapts to that straight away. It takes time, and some people never adapt or adapt in the wrong way. That is not particularly beneficial to their well-being. So that's why I was making the point that technology is fast, humanity might not, but not. I wasn't trying to separate the two. But I think you were referring very much to technology, I think, at least if I hear it correctly, or the new environment that we're in as a different means of creating meaning and of interpretation. And that's, I think, one of our points that we are trying to make as well, that in the end, the interpretation or the judgment or the creation of meaning, that's what we do as humans. That's basically that's the core of being human, I think. And we shouldn't be, but it requires skill, right? I mean, everything that we do as human requires skill. We're not, you need to learn to think, right? So we're all born with a brain, but it takes effort to learn to think. You need to actually be taught that. You can teach it yourself, but you do need to learn to think. If I just take it as another example, so you need to be able to learn to question. You need to learn to use the new environment to create meaning and to communicate that meaning and to build common meaning, shared meaning. That was kind of my point there. So I think we're very much on the same page there.
And to tap on this, right? So I mean, part of what you're saying, Toby, also is interesting because it's very clearly like an ideological consequence, right? Because I feel that part of the underlying text that you have, there's the question of speed. It's like you have to adapt now or you're out, right? Because to to make things in order, you're making a point which is about the demography of adoption, saying like the fact that it can be used amazingly doesn't mean that a vast majority of the population or the significant whatever majority of the population will use it magnificently. And then if there is like strong disparity demographically speaking of a usage, then what does it mean, right? And it's totally true. I think what's interesting is that this inevitability syndrome and ideology that we diagnose does translate itself into like, you have to do it now, otherwise you're out. And one thing that as a citizen we can do, I think that I would sort of urge everyone here to do, say like, no, there's no urge. Like this is marketing, right? Like it's been 3 years in production. Yes, things have changed. Like, you know, there's been a lot of discourse. There's been a lot of prototypes. There's a lot of stuff, right? But I mean, my grandmother is still my grandmother, right? The world has not changed. Terminator is not walking this earth. Like, you know, no, like a lot of it is an ideological or, you know, almost propagandist sort of discourse, because obviously it sort of works, right? It's a snowball of like, you know, urgency, like it's basically fake urgency and time scarcity, right? So clearly it's something that we can resist, saying like, wait, why do I have to sort of like jump on like Claude Code now or Claude Skills or whatever? Like, why now? On the flip side, two things about adoption that I find interesting is, if you look at like the rapidity of adoption of AI, like the stats that we get, right, for what they're worth, I mean, I'm not sure anything has been adopted that fast in human history in those numbers, right? So also like, and this is pretty positive, right? In a sense, like, you know, it sounds like for whichever reason, people are actually jumping at bandwagon. Actually,
But I think that speaks. I think that speaks to the fact that it coming back to the question of whether we'll be left behind and so on. I think it does speak to the fact that the technology is very usable and that we are very much able to adapt to it.
Exactly right, and we have this sort of you know, and the other thing that I would say is that we also have those fears because of acceleration, etc., which are legit. That, you know, what is going to be the emergent property of this mass utilization, right? And essentially that's also part of the ideological thing, right, where there's this sort of like doomy you know, ragdoll of like, well, you know, at some point it's going to go rogue and kill us all with like nano whatever, right? But essentially this is just like one emergent scenario, but we're afraid of all of the emergent scenarios. I mean, if you think of it for a second, like most white people are very much afraid of like Chinese or Indians sort of like all of a sudden starting to just be really wildly out there in an unpredictable emergent thing. This is also scary to them to an extent. It's just lumped into this sort of like weird thing, right? So we have this weird relationship with this, and that's very ideological to us. That's like, you know, we're projecting futures, they're being instrumentalized, or they're very, very active. They're very instrumental into how you live in the present, right? But nonetheless, as a, you know, I wanted to just bring things down to a very practical example of how things can be done, which might be useful for everyone. So it's within Claude Code, but there's something very interesting that shows how easy it can be, which is called Ask User Question. It's a very simple feature. What it will do, if for any one of you that might use Claude Code, is that it will ask clarifying questions, which are just like very logical, rational ways of just challenging whatever you've asked, right? And you can do that in a loop, right? And this is not perfect, but it is very simple, and actually LLMs do that pretty well, right? Because this is just like coherent logic, right? It's not going to go outside of the box, but it's going to ask you a question, but do you mean A or B? Do you want this or that? You know, have you taken the decision already or not? Yeah, do you want scenarios? And those are all clarifying questions. And what we're talking about here is critical sense, broadly, right? And what we're saying is that we need critical sense, otherwise like we're doomed. And this is a very good example, in my opinion, or at least a very simple and a good feature of actually putting that into a system. And there's no technical difficulty to put that anywhere. Any of you that is actually building stuff can build that feature like in the next 2 hours, right? And then here you have it. You've built a critical sense strengthening feature by default into your LLM. Sorry, yes, because yeah, I think we way past, right?
Yeah, we are a little bit way past, but let's try to continue a little bit more, which brings us to question number 3. I don't know if the owner of this question is in the meeting, but I think that it brings us very well some of the things that you have put together before, your different views from Western and Eastern cultures, the inevitability, scale, and coherence. And now suddenly we have to say something about that. So what should a citizen assembly on AI actually decide?
I look at this question not so much from a purely, let's say, institutional perspective. I think the prescription, if you wish, that we envision is civic rather than technical. So it has to do with interrogation of legitimacy criteria, for instance, or refusing kind of the depoliticizing of certain in this kind of ideology of inevitability, where you say, no, we can't have a conversation because we have to move. It's about demanding transparency and accountability, especially also where decisions and values are hidden in algorithms, and they're absolutely there. You cannot not have values in language. It doesn't exist, right? And for me, the overhanging vision is also, the technology, not just let's say the proverbial AI, but also additive manufacturing, increased bandwidths, all these kinds of things actually enable us to become a lot more decentralized. I think we should, my vision, I don't know, whether you all agree on that, is that, instead of maybe of using technology to climb up the tree in this highly consolidated world of the industrial era, where a few multi-trillion companies essentially decide what meaning is and what good is and what happiness is and what etc. is. The same technology can also allow us, to go to direct democracy, for instance. Audrey Tang talks about democracy as a social technology, something that can evolve. Our democracies are no longer working because political participation is low, and it just basically has just become ritualized, the kind of elections that you have frequently, and then put somebody in place, etc. I'm not going down that route too far, but I see this happening, by the way. We put a few examples in the essay, but I see it on the street as well. I do see people endeavoring to use the technology to be much more grassrooted. I do believe that, and that's, I think, one of the closing phrases that we put in the essay, that the future of the information era should not be decided in corporate boardrooms or by executive teams or even by political committees. They should be. This is about meaning. It should be decided in classrooms, in libraries, in civic communities, like the community we have here today. That's where it should be decided, and we can, because we have the technology. I don't know where we're all sitting here today. We're probably all sitting in different continents and different countries. We are talking, we are creating meaning, and we are kind of creating a vision, each individually from us, and we are able to take that and do something with it. So why would we want to settle for this overhanging kind of Apple iPhone kind of conversation? There's only one phone and only one phone is right. Only one Gen I is good, and let's chase for the new model and just pay a little bit more for it. There's no need. What the technology enables in that direction, it also enables in the other direction. But corporations that are driven by return on capital and that are putting billions and billions of capital in place want to have users and want to have active users, but that might not be what we as civilians need. We as civilians, we just need proper tools that allow us to thrive and be happy in our local communities. And these local communities might not be geographical bound. They could be cross geography. They could be, this could be interest groups. It doesn't really matter. But that's not what currently this whole information era is driven towards, because it's still driven by industrial era principles. And that doesn't need to be. Yeah.
So to just maybe another angle to this, right, to answer that question, if you remember what we said earlier about Dario and the vaccines and the cure for the illness, right? So essentially, if you follow that logic, it would entail that the vision that we would suggest, or evocatively, mean that at a community level, you probably would have your own LLM, right? You would have a local instance. You would have basically your local thing, right? So I've said earlier, there's a Swiss one, but essentially, like, the advance of technology at the moment makes it so that it's very, very, very realistic to have the technology of today, very cheaply from a cost, electricity, etc. perspective, locally within the next years, right? Because of, we're not going to go in details, but that's highly realistic, right? I can even, just as a backing point, I helped a company in France last year adopt something which is exactly this, like a local, very local, open source LLM system. They can have their own thing, right? And it's a 500 people company. This is not like a, gigantic mayhem one. If you follow that logic, there is something in a company like Anthropic, you have a bunch of people like AI ethicists and other glorified, Mexican generals, and they do something called alignment, right? And they do evals and alignment. And we're not going to go in technicalities, but metaphorically speaking, what is this? This is ethics, right? They're assessing whether the performance, like the behavior of the tool, is aligned to a certain set of values, which in my view is one way, very simplified, to do ethics, right? Like, is it aligned with what we expect? Essentially, our vision, if we combine both things, what we're saying is that, well, since there is no reason for communities, large and small, not to have their own thing, then why would they have to rely on a bunch of white PhD in California to ethically decide whether the behavior of that tool actually meets their local ethical criteria? There's no reason to do this. And so as such, hopefully this is pragmatic and concrete enough. This is something that, the citizen assembly should do. And either it is at the tool level, which is quite general, or it could be at the utilization. Imagine that you start to use AI to help decision-making of any form of administration. Then, if this, then we could assess whether the decision that has been made or about to be made actually are ethically correct, right? It's a product of AI. And this is also something that we would suggest an AI assembly should be able to do. Because yes, I guess we've run over time once again.
It's okay. I think that the rules were we have 5 minutes, but we
but it's super
have
useful
flexibility
that
as well. But the
sure.
idea is we still have time for one final question, and then I will ask you to kind of round up a little bit.
Oh.
It's up to you to decide number 4 or number 5, which are the ones that we can see here. If you feel more interested in one of the two. But let's try to.
I will take 4 because it allows me to talk about one of my other favorite topics, which we did not include in the paper because we were thinking of doing it. It might be a future paper, and that's education. When I've made a point recently in another publication to relook the way we educate ourselves. When I'm actually talking about the educational system. I think that we have educated ourselves, especially as we enter the new world, in a too narrow way. And I've made a point that we should invest a lot more again on liberal arts as part of education, which has been disinvested massively over decades and still is disinvested massively in decades. Because Antoine and I are both lovers of philosophy, so that's in a way adjacent to it. If you want people to interact with a tool that allows you to really boost your thinking capabilities, you better make sure that your muscles are strong, your thinking muscles are strong, and that you are more, and that these muscle mass, it's not muscle mass because of your brain, but just metaphorically, is much broader development that you develop, that you don't just have a very strong right arm, but that you're like the bodybuilders, your whole body is strong, but then mentally. So, and that you have an education really focused on inquiry, on asking questions, on researching, on challenging. One thing, and then you see this very much expressed on social media, we've lost, not all societies, but most societies have lost the ability to argue, right? This is part of our humanity as well. Our ability to argue. As I'm saying this, our cats are running around me arguing as well. So I'm not saying that other animals don't argue. They do, but that's part of. We actually create meaning through argument, through being in disagreement, right? If we do that in a proper way, it's extremely enriching. I forgot how to do that. So I want to answer this point 4 question on, yes, this risk is there, and I think it can be massively mitigated by relooking at how we educate more. Also, I think we need a lot more experiential education. Allow students, and students can be of any age, students to actually learn while doing, so that they can recreate these collaboration skills and these challenging skills and these thinking skills and these questioning skills and asking for transparency and trying to find truth, and discovering who they are themselves within this structure. So I think again we cannot look at a tool in isolation. It's part of a complex system in which we are all embedded, and it's not just a matter of fixing the tool or fixing how we develop the tool. It's also a matter of fixing the surrounding social environment, and education is going to be absolutely crucial here.
Yeah, the context is really important here, right? But I guess like one thing that comes to mind as like a keen follower of like Jewish thoughts and philosophy is it's this the family or the community context towards being incredibly critical and asking questions and challenging, right? And what's important is not to just glorify necessarily like this or that community. What I just want to put here is like there is a social context that makes challenging and actually being potentially sometimes aggressive intellectually very safe, right? So, and it goes under, right, this, and I'm going to go towards ideology here, as saying like if we keep on letting environments be created where there is no space to challenge, right, because we have no time and actually we all know it's the truth and it's whatever, then the context does not exist for kids or adults alike to just go into an argument, right, and a discussion. The second thing I would say is about humanities, etc. is, so the anarchist way would say like it's all figment of how large is your imagination, because the further it is, the more you'll be able to imagine a counter scenario that then challenges like a dogma, right? But another way to say this would be the interest of poetry, right, or literature, just because it gives you other figures, and your pattern, like as humans we're pretty good at pattern matching and weird pattern matching, like we misunderstand stuff all the time, and so we create links between items that honestly have like zero potential link. It's just like we got crazy for a second. But what's interesting is that this comparison mechanism is very useful to sort of assess whether something sounds trustworthy, right? And so another way maybe like to share, right, that we figured out with Jeff into talking about this, to say it's not that we want people to study poetry for the sake of studying poetry. I mean, I'd love this, but we probably long past. It's really like, pragmatically speaking, poetry, for instance, will let you think in metaphors. It will essentially try to get you to find other very weird and adjacent ways to talk about the same thing, right? Which forces you to start to compare uncomparable things, right? Which is a very clear, non-numerical, and maybe you could say irrational to an extent way of comparing things. And we would basically offer that this is very fundamental to a critical sense, right? And as such, then if you educate kids or adults alike, this is important. So it's with context, muscle practice, but also like you need width, essentially. You this narrowness, in a view. And again, like I'm going to sound very Marxist, right? Because if you over specialize, basically you're going to make people unable to basically be relevant outside of the specialization, right? And we're saying nothing new here, because it's still about critical thinking, and this AI is actually not changed. That what is only has changed is the risk of abuse or of failure, I would say, a mistake. It's just dramatically amplified in impact. Geraldo, I see you've raised a hand.
Yes, because I think we need to wrap up, right, Kazi? And I really want just to say some few words to thank so much you, Antoine and Jeff. Amazing session. And everybody for contributing with the questions before the session, during the session. Things were happening here. And I'm just thinking the special thanks for changing the format. This is the first time we tried that in a 4D conversation, right? And if you think this is a very good asset you create here, Antoine and Jeff. This should be a living. We just covered 3-4 questions of a long list. So this could be a live, I mean, this is happening as we speak. So let's keep this in the community. And again, we are ready over time, but an invitation for the ones that are not part of the 4D community formally to join us. So we continue that, because there are, I think, like you said also, Bjorn, sometimes the question is so much more important than the answer. So that's exactly what you created. And thank you so much, everybody. Kazi, the last word for you.
Oh, the last word is for the
Yes.
two of you, Jeff and Antoine. Thank you so much. So if you want to share with us any final thought before we close, that would be fantastic.
Well, from my end, I mean, I'm very grateful for the openness of the audience today, and and this is an example of the kind of dynamic that I think is necessary and is important, because out of the conversation, new things emerge that none of us was able to think of before having the conversation. So I'm very grateful for that today. Second point that was on my mind was when I was crossing a bridge yesterday or something, and much of our infrastructure is so unbelievably ugly, and it's not very conducive to communal life. And I was thinking about a bridge in a book by a Serbian writer, where an old bridge where a lot of community life took place. Because in the past, when we had a very slow society, the engineers had the bandwidth and the time to not just to build something functional, but also something beautiful and contributing to communal life. I hope now that in the information era, with all the technology we're having, and not just computer algorithms, but there's a whole lot of other technology online and coming online, that again we will start creating the space for people to not just create functionality, but also to create beauty and create stuff that actually encourages us to start interacting with each other again. That's besides this whole plurality vision that I have in my mind, that's the other big vision that I have in my mind.
I would say elegance rather than beautiful, but we're not going to bicker on words.
You're French.
Yes, obviously. No, I mean, on my end, I would just it's going to sound probably idealistic, but I just basically wish that this is the first of many, many dialogues, and that at some point, some of us realize that they're exactly the same sort of dialogues happening, and we have no idea who those people are, because that's basically the intention, right? Of having those things and creating, if I dare say, a sort of common sense that, I know that you guys know that I know that that something else is possible. And that there's no such thing as inevitable speed or inevitable, control taking or terminators. It doesn't stand, right? And it's actually rather easy, maybe sometimes funny, to just say that it's not happening, right? And saying that's not happening, in my view, and just making sure that more people realize they're not the only one thinking this is a bit strange, has so much power, right? Because this is common sense is what is needed. And I'm gonna, of course, quote Steven Pinker, as Alan said, common sense is necessary for cooperation. And we talk about alienation, right? Alienation is gonna get towards competition. If AI or not, we basically want to be able to cooperate. At least this is what Jeff and I stands for. And for this, we need a form of common sense. And the bit of common sense we pledge for here is to say, we can do beautiful things with those AI things. And the so-called American marketing is very, very far from being the only immutable and inevitable scenario. That's pretty much that.
Thank you so much. And I think that they deserve a big round of applause from us digitally and physically. Yes. Thank you so much for this fantastic conversation. It will be very fun to see how AI makes sense of it, especially because we didn't share the actual questions you were responding. So it will be fun to see. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
I don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys have a great evening.